Okay, Doc, I think we're going to start. I see that some people are already in the room and some people are still coming in. So what we're going to do is we're going to start and go ahead. And let me just quickly give the guys the topic for tonight. Hello, everyone. We are basically talking about sort of Christianophobia in modern society tonight with Dr. George Yancey, with a conversation with sociology. And every week with basically with Apologetics Academy, we're trying to sort of get online sort of interaction between individuals from different backgrounds with different and various topics. And this week I'm actually quite excited to hear from Dr. Yancey and to hear what he's going to say and mention about what the topic of discussion. So if you're welcome, and Dr. Yancey, welcome you with us, and I hope you enjoy talking with us and the questions afterwards. What we usually do is we allow for you to do your presentation, and after your presentation, we give you an opportunity for if you have any questions during the basic presentation of Dr. Yancey, you're welcome to just raise your hand, or you can just click specifically on the little box that asks for Q&A, and you can send your question, and we can also read that to Dr. Yancey. So Dr. Yancey, welcome. Enjoy your talk, and unfortunately I see your camera is down, so everybody just has the audio tonight in your presentation, but welcome, and we hope this is not the last.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead, and if for some reason you aren't hearing me, please just send me a chat and let me know. I want to bring up the topic of Christianophobia, and I'm just going to call this the basics. Looking at it, let me go ahead and go to our PowerPoint. This is a topic that I've been studying for the past 5 or 6 years, and I just want to introduce this topic here in the United States, what I've found, and whether it applies to other parts of the Western world. I guess we'll soon see. I just want to address 3 questions. The first question is, in the United States, is anti-Christian animosity widespread? In other words, are we talking about a few nutcases and a few nut jobs, or are we talking about something that is a larger problem? Second, is the animosity unreasonable? Is it something that, well, yeah, some people are a little angry at others, but it's really not unreasonable anger? And third, are there consequences to this animosity? Maybe people are mad, but maybe it really doesn't matter. Maybe, that's people get mad at each other, get mad at the groups, but if they don't treat them any differently, then it really doesn't matter. So these are the 3 questions I want to address. The first question is, is it widespread? And so what I want to do is look at disaffinities of different social groups. I looked at a data set that allowed people to rank how much they liked or just did not like other groups. They used what's called a thermometer study. And basically, they were able to rank groups as, very warmly up to 100 or very coldly down to 0. And what I was curious about was, did you rank a certain group far above other groups or far below other groups by what we call a standard deviation? And when I average all of the religious and racial groups, I look to see whether or not they're ranked either a standard deviation above or below. For the purposes of this, we'll only look at people who rank a group a standard deviation below the average of the other racial and religious groups. These are the groups, some of the groups that we looked at, I averaged together. And as you can see, atheists, about 45% of the people in the survey ranked atheists a standard deviation below the average of the other groups. The second group, though, was Christian fundamentalists. And the term was Christian fundamentalists. It was not, fundamentalists in general. And you can see that about a third of Americans rank them a standard deviation below. Not, it's a little bit higher than Muslims, but it's not so high that we know that it's significantly different. So about a third of Americans rank Christian fundamentalists. Now, how you define fundamentalists, that's an interesting question. I've been doing some work on that. I think people basically define fundamentalists as a very conservative Christian, people who, by and large, accept the word of God, the Bible as the word of God, these sort of markers. I find it interesting that Christian fundamentalists are ranked around the same level as Muslims, because there's a lot of talk of Islamophobia in the United States, rightly so. But conservative Christians or Christian fundamentalists rank just about as badly off as Muslims. And then you can see Mormons, and then, you know, as far as racial groups, they're not ranked there's not a lot of people with disaffinities towards them at all. Now, who tends to have these sort of disaffinities towards Christians? Well, what I wanted to do was compare Christians to those who hate them. And since a lot of people define Christian fundamentalists as Christians who believe in the Word of God, that became my Christian group. And then those anti-Christian hostility, or rank them a standard deviation below the other groups, that became the second column you see. And then the third column was all respondents. And as you can see, there's more females than males among the Christian group, but more males than females among those with anti-Christian hostility. And then you can see the control group, if you will, all respondents. Among whites, only about half of all whites, only about half of the group who believe the Bible is the Word of God are white, compared to almost 3/4 of those anti-Christian hostility. When it comes down to a bachelor's degree, 1 out of 5 Christians who believe the Bible is the Word of God have a bachelor's degree, almost half with anti-Christian hostility. When it makes to making more than $100,000 a year, not even 10% of these Christians do that, where more than 1/4 of those with anti-Christian hostility do. So what we have here are white males, highly educated and fairly wealthy, who tend to have hostility towards Christians relative to all respondents and relative to Christians. These are individuals who are fairly powerful in our society. Now, I could have done this with those with anti-Muslim behaviors, and what you can find there is that they're male and white, but they're not highly educated and they're not very wealthy. A couple of other categories to let us know who these people are. Those who are politically liberal. Among the Christians, only 16.6%, and by politically liberal, on a 7-point scale, they said they were slightly liberal, moderately liberal, or very liberal. Then I put them in there. Almost half of those anti-Christian hostility are politically liberal. And then attend religious meetings, and that could be church, synagogue, mosque, at least weekly. And about 43% of Christians who believe the Bible is the Word of God do so. 13% of those with anti-Christian hostility. So in addition to being powerful, white, male, educated, wealthy, we also see that they're politically progressive and they're pretty irreligious. So this tells us who this population is, who they tend to be. So the answer to the first question, I think we're seeing bear itself out. It's not everyone, obviously. It's not a majority of Americans, but a good percentage, a significant minority of Americans have some animosity towards Christians. Now, the next question is, okay, they have animosity towards Christians. What does that mean? Does it mean that they have this burning hatred and they want to kill them all, or does it mean that they're just irritated with them? And to be honest, we can't tell the degree to which either one of those categories are true. But we can see whether or not that there is this propensity to have this sort of anti-Christian bias by looking at a survey, research that I did with cultural progressive activists. Now, the key to this is my sample. My sample was more than 90% white, more than half male, more than half made more than $75,000 a year. 43% had a graduate degree of some type, and 16% had a doctorate. 75% were atheists or agnostic. So right now we're seeing that this sample fits the profile of people who tend to have anti-Christian hostility. Very white, very male, wealthy, educated, irreligious. I didn't ask my political ideology, but many of them did exhibit a progressive ideology. So this is a sample that we would think would have a high level of Christianophobia. And so we asked them open-ended questions on how they felt about Christians, about the Christian right. Some of our responses, I think, indicated that, at least among some, that there is what I would call an unreasonable, irrational hatred or fear of Christians. For example, these are actual quotes that my respondents gave. I want them all to die in a fire. Churches and houses of religion should be designated as nuclear test zones. Kill them all, let their God sort them out. Would like to give them all a frontal lobotomy. Line them up and shoot them. The only good Christian is a dead Christian. And this is the title of my book, So Many Christians, So Few Lions. And this is interesting because I use this as a title because several respondents talked about feeding Christians to lions. And then I found out why, if I can get there. Yes. I found this online. There we go. Sorry about the pause. Yes, I actually found this online. So many Christians, so few lions baby onesie. That T-shirts. They had all sorts of muscle shirts, and you can get a baby onesie of so many Christians, so few lions. What this tells me is that this is not just a few people. You can actually sell this online, and you can see the different varieties that they have. You can get a so many Christians, so few lions bib. You have different colors even. If you want your so many Christians, so few lions in pink, you can do that, or green. So this is, there's a cottage industry that's feeding into this sort of anger. This doesn't tell me numbers, but it tells me that there's a presence there. By the way, I did this on a Google search, just for the heck of it. I also searched for the Confederate flag. And you cannot get the Confederate flag in a Google shopping search. I'm sure you can buy one somewhere, but not in a Google shopping search. But you can buy a baby bib on So Many Christians, So Few Lions. So, oops. And okay. So let's go ahead and move on. Now, these are some of the hostile quotes. I want to make it very clear that obviously not all my respondents had this level of anger and hostility. But there were some values that tend to link them together. When I talk about Christianophobia, I talk about hatred and fear. And here are some of the comments some of my respondents made. I believe they're the definition of evil. I find that very interesting. The very definition of evil is not Hitler, it is Christians. The only positive thing they can do is cease to exist. I wish I could eliminate them from the universe. They, along with Muslim fundamentalists, represent the single greatest threat to the survival of the human species. Those who preach Armageddon and see it as a necessary event to achieve their desired ends are not to be trusted with the reins of power, especially in nuclear capable states. So this sort of shows you the sort of contempt that some of my respondents have for conservative Christians. And then there are certain stereotypical images that play themselves out among my respondents, and this was pretty common. I've told my Christian friends, not Christian right, my beliefs, and they don't say a whole lot. They seem to respect my feelings, my face, but probably talk about me behind my back. Or they're really faithful, probably believe I'm going to hell. So this person has this stereotype that's really not borne out by facts. He says they don't talk, they don't confront him to his face, but they're talking about him or her behind their back. Remind me very much of the brown shirt strap of Nazi Germany. The stereotypes. Theology came up a lot, that Christians want to set up a theology and take over society in that way. They're generalized people, but that might be because I'm white. So there's this assumption that Christians are racist. That if you're a Christian, then you're a racist. I mean, this person doesn't have any evidence, but says that's because they're white that they're nice to them. And here is a comment on theocracy. Gender would make America a theocracy, which frightens me as it takes us back to the dark ages, politically, culturally, educationally, and morally. So you have these sort of stereotypes, these sort of stereotypical images of Christians that these individuals seem to have. Now, have there been Christians who have done some horrible, bad things? Of course. But research has really shown that, a lot of these stereotypes are not borne out in the facts. That Christians, I don't know any research that shows that Christians want to take over society to the degree that anyone else wants to take over society. So, so a lot of these stereotypes are what I would call unreasonable stereotypes. Christians are not like Nazi Germany. All right, can you find some examples? Of course, you can find examples of anything from any group. But these are some of the stereotypical images that some of these individuals have. And so when we look at the nature of this anger and of this fear, we can see that a lot of the nature of this anger and fear is, I would argue, unreasonable, especially when we look at some of the hateful comments that seem to advocate, let me see, that the killing of Christians. All right. Now, I want to go to the third topic, which is, is there any cost to Christianophobia? Does it in any way cost Christians? And this is research that I did for a book called Compromising Scholarship, where I sent this survey out to professors, and I asked them this theoretical question: that your faculty is hiring a new professor, below the list of characteristics others new hire. Many of them you cannot directly inquire. However, you're able to learn these characteristics would make you more or less likely to support their hire. And then there's a scale from 1 to 7. 1 means it greatly damages your support. 7 greatly enhances, and 4 doesn't matter. And those are the groups, I asked about. I asked about, I think there's about 26 different groups here that I asked them about. And you can see towards the bottom of the first column, I started looking at religious groups: atheists, Mormon, fundamentalists, evangelicals, mainline Catholics, so forth and so on. So it's political groups, it's sexuality groups, religious groups, and so forth and so on. I asked of these disciplines, there's 10 disciplines, but really 9. The languages are divided into English and non-English because there's some interesting differences, which I won't go into today. But I just want to show you the sort of disciplines that this survey covered. Okay, this is a breakdown of that question when given to fundamentalists, evangelicals, NRA members, Republicans, Muslims, atheists, among all academics. So remember, the question was, will it damage, or will it your willingness to hire them? Or will it enhance your willingness to hire them? You can see that about half of all academics say they find out someone is a fundamentalist, it will damage their willingness to hire them. About 40% say they find out someone's an evangelical, it will damage their willingness to hire them. And then you have some political categories, so forth and so on. And then we look at Muslims and atheists. Very few say that if they find out someone's a Muslim, it's going to damage their willingness to hire them, or an atheist. In fact, if you look over, if you're an atheist, and this is the only group that this is true, it's more likely to enhance their willingness to hire you then damn mutual willingness to hire you. This indicates that for Christians, in this case, for conservative Protestants, if they go into academia, their religious beliefs can hurt them as far as getting a job. This is a very real consequence. This is not merely, I don't like Christians, I'd rather not hang around Christians, so forth and so on. This is a real consequence. Now, the question you're asking is, okay, that's your research. Is it only your research that we have to rely upon? Well, fortunately, I'm not the only one who's looked at this, or this is not the only evidence that this is the case. For example, Inbars and Lammers don't look at Christians per se, but they do look at whether or not academics, in this case, social psychologists, are willing to discriminate against conservatives. Now remember, there's less willingness to hire someone who's a conservative Protestant than someone who is a political conservative. So whatever they find about political conservatives, we should think would at least be as strong when it comes to conservative Protestants. And what they found was that if you're a political conservative, not only were social psychologists less willing to hire you, but also less willing to publish research that comes from your perspective, less willing to invite you as a speaker, and less willing to get you a grant. So you are hamstringed to a certain extent if you're a political conservative. And given what we just saw, it would be naive not to think that this is also not the case for a conservative Protestant. Tobin and Weinberg find that that when academics rank religious groups, that the groups that they rank lowest are evangelicals. And I remember correctly, more than half of the academics rank evangelicals far below their average. And compared to other groups, we can see that academics, they do bring some of this hostility into their work. And academics, if you think about it, meet a lot of the criteria we looked at. More likely to be white, male, obviously educated, and maybe not wealthy, but better off than most individuals. Now, this is a really interesting research, Rothman and Lichner. They actually looked at academics and surveyed them, and they controlled for the productivity of academics, and they controlled for other categories such as race and age and gender and such. And what they found was that if you are a conservative, if you are a social conservative, then you are more likely to be in a lower status position than not, even after controlling for things such as productivity and race and age. Usually, and I can say this, I don't know if there's a research out there, I've seen some research that suggests this, but I can say this from personal experience. If you're a social conservative in academia, you're probably religious, and chances are you're either a Catholic or a conservative Protestant. Chances are pretty high that that's the case. So even though they're not measuring religion per se, their research has some very important implications. It basically indicates that if you are a conservative Protestant with social conservative beliefs, you are probably not going to wind up as high in academia if you did not have that. Once again, very real consequences to Christianophobia. And then the last is just a case study, if you will, of Mike Adams, who was an atheist who became a Christian and became a very outspoken Christian. And when he went up not for tenure, for full professorship, he was denied. He thought something was fishy, so he sued. And they were able to get the materials that showed that a big reason why he was denied was he was an outspoken Christian, and they did not like his beliefs. He won that lawsuit, and the evidence is out there. Now, this is only one case. There are other cases of suits settled out of court, because usually they do settle out of court on something like this. But, you know, to say that this never happens, we know that it's happened in the case of Mike Adams. And given the preponderance of the other evidence, my research, this other research, it's fairly easy to say. I would argue that it is definitely the case that there's a cost in academia for being a Christian. Unfortunately, I don't have research from other areas of our society, in part because academics probably have not studied this because of the bias that is there. But Christianophobia is not just that people don't like Christians. People act on that in ways, at least in academia, that has a cost to Christians. So let me just go ahead and close with these three questions. Once again, is anti-Christian animosity widespread? And my answer is it's as much as anti-Muslim animosity, but the people who have it are more powerful. Where those who hate Muslims, at least in the United States, don't tend to have economic and educational power. They may do other horrible things to Muslims, and I'm definitely not saying that Muslims don't face Islamophobia in the United States. They do. But they don't have the economic and educational power that those with anti-Christian bias tend to have. So, and we know that as far as sheer numbers, it's about the same. Is the animosity unreasonable? And ideally, I would like to do a random sample to document, you know, what percentage of individuals have what we might call an unreasonable level of hatred or fear. As you might well imagine, given what we know about academia now, there's not a lot of really good studies that document that sort of hatred or fear. But with my qualitative sample, I think we can say that there's a non-trivial level of unreasonable hatred or fear out there. At least enough that you can sell products that, you know, teach your kid that's okay to torture Christians to death by feeding them to lions. So you know, at least some of this animosity is unreasonable. I'm not saying that all 33% of the individuals who rank Christian fundamentalists a standard deviation below others have unreasonable hatred or animosity. But it's naive to think that there isn't a non-trivial level, given how freely my respondents exhibited that sort of hatred and fear. Oh, there we go. Are there consequences to this animosity? At least in academia, conservative Christians pay a price for that animosity. That's not just been documented by my research, but by other research. If you're a conservative Christian and people find out, and in this day and age, people have ways of trying to find out, at least through the internet and online, you're going to have to be a better applicant to get an academic job. And if you publish along the lines that support your beliefs, as feminists can do and as other groups do, you're going to have a harder time getting published. You're going to have a harder time getting grants. And you're more likely to wind up in a lower status position. So these are important consequences. Now, one might think, well, academia, how many people really go into academia? And that's true, most people do not. But academia is a very important element of our culture. And if academics are excluding a certain group, then that group's voice is pretty silent in academia. I'm not making a claim. I'm not arguing that Christians face it as horrible as some other groups have in our society, or maybe even still do today. But there are consequences to this animosity. It's not painless, and it does not come without consequence. So that is basically my presentation, and I don't know how we'll do the questions, but we'll see about what we can do.
Do you think that this discrimination in academia is the same in the UK and elsewhere as in America?
Yeah, I think it's probably at least as bad in Europe as it is in America, and it might be worse, but I don't have any direct evidence of that.
Sure. Someone asked, surely discrimination on the grounds of religion is illegal. Can't the dismissing of a person or not hiring of them on religious grounds be challenged legally?
Yes, but you have to be able to show it in a court of law. And what happens is a lot of times, like, for example, the Mike Adams case, They put some writings he had from town hall in his packet, and they went to the committee, to his department committee. But then they took those packets, those out when it went up to the provost and such, because the provost would have known you can't do this. So only because he took them the case and they were able to, to do the things lawyers do, as far as getting materials and stuff, we're able to find that out. So yeah, you're right. You technically can't do it. And that's why my question I put, you can't act on this. And that's correct. However, and I know of other cases where people try to hide what they're doing. And so that's the problem.
Right. Okay, if anyone else has any other questions that they want to submit, just fire them away using the Q&A box, or simply raise your hand and I'll promote you to panelist. Mandy asks, what do you predict in the next 10 years in regards to the animosity towards Christians? Will it increase?
I would say it probably will in the United States. At least I think it will. And unfortunately, I think it will no matter who becomes president of the United States. I think if Clinton becomes president, I think that, she will, I'm not saying that she has this animosity, but she will serve those who, and if Trump becomes president, I think people will use that as a basis for animosity towards Christians. They'll say, hey, Christians don't want to support Trump and put him in as president. So, yeah, do I think that this animosity can eventually be fought? Yes, but I think it's a longer term fight than, say, 10 years from now. I think in the short term, it's going to increase.
Do you think that Christianophobia in society is more subtle than something like Islamophobia or homophobia?
I think that the people who have Christianophobia, because they're educated and wealthy, have ways of making it more subtle. Yes, I think that, and I would say it's less violent. Mm-hmm. You're not gonna, a bunch of rich, educated white guys aren't gonna go around beating people up. But there's other ways in which you can punish someone for being a Christian. So, and also because they're educated. Oftentimes, I think they have to try to justify what they're doing. And so when I say race, there's talk about laws that had a disparate impact. A law that seemed fair on the surface, but the reality was it impacted Blacks more than it impacted other people. I think that's what you're seeing more with Christianophobia. Here's one example. I don't know if they're doing this over in Europe, but in the United States, some colleges are developing what they call all-comers policies, which means that if you're a student group, you have to allow anyone who wants to try to get a leadership position in your college. So if you're a Christian group, well, on the surface, it sounds like, well, everyone has to do this. The reality is that the way the policies are enforced are basically only on Christian groups. And second, if you're a Republican group, you can say, I don't want a Democrat because that's not a protected class. Religion is a protected class, and so they're using that against Christians to say, no, a Christian group cannot have religious requirements for leadership. And then that disproportionately affects a Christian group that wants a leadership that is Christian. Some of the other religious groups don't care as much. To be honest, the Jewish groups don't care as much a lot of times, but the Christian groups do. So this is what a disparate impact ruling, a policy that on the surface seems fair, but in reality is going to impact Christians much more so than any other group, especially when it's enforced.
Mandy asks, have you experienced this at all personally?
I've experienced it somewhat. I remember when I was teaching as an adjunct professor, and I was teaching a race and ethnicity course and a sociology of religion course. And only the sociology of religion course that people question whether or not I could be unbiased, not the race and ethnicity course, and you can't see it because my lighting's so bad, I'm an African American. So, I've seen some of that. I think I'm experiencing it somewhat now as I write about this and do research on this subject, and seeing the different ways my research is treated now as opposed to when I was writing about racial issues. So I've seen it somewhat. Now, I'm very fortunate that I'm in a great place, and I'm not here saying my job is threatened or anything like that. But yeah, I've seen it somewhat in my field.
Okay. An anonymous viewer asks, I understand there is some discrimination against Christians, but I find it hard to believe your findings, which show it is more prominent in academia than Islamophobia. Having not studied this issue, it seems that Islamophobia is far more present in modern society than Christianophobia.
Yeah, okay. I'll take that two ways. In academia, I think that there's almost no doubt that Christianophobia is more rampant than Islamophobia. Not just my study, but you look at other research when academics rank conservative Christians and Muslims, they rank Muslims higher. I'm not saying there's not Islamophobia in academia, but I've had a professor use the term Bible thumper in class while she was teaching. I cannot imagine a professor using a derogatory Islamic term, like raghead, while teaching and not, if not fired, severely disciplined. So I think that's up in the air. Is there more Christianophobia or Islamophobia? And what I would say is, probably the same percentage of individuals have hostility towards conservative Christians as towards Muslims, but the way it's felt is different. In Muslims in the United States, there's talk about banning Muslims. There's some violence that's done to Muslims. When it comes to Christians, I think you're finding, I've mentioned the all-comers ban. And by the way, colleges that where Muslim groups did not want an all-comers policy did not pass them, which is another indication that this is different for Christians in academia than it is for Muslims. And I know this from talking with individuals who've been involved in this case. I think you're finding policies. I think you're finding hostility towards Christians that's not there towards Muslims in certain circles in our society. So I'm open to the possibility that in the United States, in fact, I wouldn't even really argue that Muslims face more animosity in the United States in general than sort of Christians. I'm not sure that's true, but I wouldn't really argue it. But in academia, there really is no strong argument that Muslims face more animosity than conservative Christians. Almost any measure you look at will show that. You can find cases of Islamophobia in academia, of course, but systematically, it's just not there.
Glenda asks, when did this Christianophobia begin to take place, and what do you think was the catalyst, or has it infiltrated slowly until we see it as it is today?
That's a really interesting question. I get asked that quite a bit. And so I'm actually doing a little bit of research to look at that. And I can tell you right now, from what I'm seeing, is that the people who tend to not like Christians, those people have always not liked Christians. So, the people who are more progressive, such so forth and so on, with one major exception, I think this is what's sort of kicked it up a notch. Recently, according to my studies, and I've this is a paper that I've not even put out for review yet, so I can't show you any numbers at this point. But this is going to be my argument, I think. Individuals do not like Christians. And while their numbers really haven't dramatically increased, what's new is in the past few years, people with more income have become more Christianophobic. And so what I think is probably happening is that, yes, we're seeing some levels probably increasing a little bit. I think we're going to see some more increase. Part of it is that I think people with Christianophobia have gained more power, more financial power than they used to. And I would envision it this way. It used to be the people who really did not like conservative Christians were, professors and were highly educated individuals who, may have had nasty things to say, but they didn't have the financial backing to really do much about it. I think in the past few years, we've seen that they've had the financial backing to do something about it. I think that's making a big difference. And Christians feel it more now because they did not feel it as much in the past. So I think that's the story that I'm thinking is starting to emerge from my data. But hopefully I'll get that to an article and get out to a journal, and then we'll see how soon it takes for me to get it published.
Elizabeth asks, why would academia be more hostile to Christians than Muslims? Both religions believe in a creator God and miracles, so neither can be grouped with the naturalists you said tend to be viewed as more academically credible.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, I've asked some people, why do you rank groups the way they do it? And here's the answer that I hear from them, is that they feel sympathetic to the Muslims because they feel Muslims are getting blamed for the actions of a few nut jobs. They don't feel that way about Christians. Now, I know it's not logical, but none of us are 100% logical. You can say the same thing about Christians. Why blame a few, all Christians or all considered Christians for the actions of a few? They just do, but they don't do that with Muslims. And so I think that's what's happening with academics. They recognize that there are Muslims who engage in violence. How can someone not recognize that? However, they see those as the exception. Whereas if a Christian does something that they determine to be homophobic or intolerant or bigoted, they see that as pretty common for Christians. That's the way they see it, and that's how they differentiate between the two.
Mark McGee asks, what do you see as the most hopeful sign for a turnaround in how non-Christians view Christians?
I think if things go the way they've been going, I don't see much of a turnaround without supernatural intervention. I do think that Christians are beginning to realize how important it is to be a player in our culture. And one of the things that I have argued that Christians need to do is to engage the culture, not just have our own little Christian silos. And that's, having Christians in academia, despite all the different difficulties, I think is very important. Having Christians in the arts and media and in entertainment is very important. And I think as we do that, then we can start turning this around. But yeah, all the trend lines right now are negative. Obviously, they're not going to keep flowing in that same direction, the same pace, but right now they're all negative. And we have to be more active in what in how we're going to address this issue if we're going to turn it around.
Any other questions for Dr. Yancey? If anyone wants to ask any last questions or make any comments, you can either submit them via the Q&A box or raise your hand, otherwise we will wrap up. Okay, I don't think anyone else has submitted any questions. So thanks, Dr. Yancey, for being on with us. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, thank you. Take care. Bye.